Hi everybody, we're here today to talk about building arguments, about how you can go from having an idea for what you'd like someone to do and use evidence to convince them to actually do that or believe something that you think is important for them to believe. There's a science to that you can learn and start to construct better arguments of your own and also recognize whether or not other arguments are quality arguments or have some flaws. So even though you've been arguing with people pretty much your entire life, what we'll do in this presentation and over the next few weeks of class is work on developing that as a skill. In the same way that last semester we built up the ability to sort of look at an essay skillfully and recognize key features. Okay, so let's start our discussion of argument by looking at a choice that a lot of you are going to have to make in the near future. Let's say that we're trying to decide which car to purchase. So let me lay out, first of all, a series of facts. Let me give you 3 facts. Let me tell you that the Toyota Prius gets excellent gas mileage and is good for the environment. Let me tell you that the BMW 4 Series is the classiest luxury car on the market and makes a statement about your personal wealth and style. And let me tell you that the Dodge Dart is one of the cheapest cars on the market. Let me give you those 3 facts. And let's say now we're going to have a debate about which car you should buy. Now, the interesting thing about argument, and one of the first concepts you need to understand, is very rarely will we actually have an argument. Very rarely will someone disagree with you about facts. And if they do, if, for example, someone thought that the Prius didn't get good gas mileage, that would be something that you'd settle probably through research, not through genuine argument or debate. If we're going to have a debate about which car to buy, we're not going to debate the facts. We're going to debate something else. We're going to talk about which of these factors is most important to consider when buying a car. Some people believe that when purchasing a car, environmental impact is the most important factor to consider. And if you believe that, then you're going to buy the Prius. Other people might believe that image and reputation are the most important factors to consider, in which case the BMW seems like a good idea. And finally, there's plenty of people who are very budget conscious and would look at a car like the Dart as the best option. And those are the things that we would actually have to convince someone of. Those beliefs about the world. What we're looking at here is a very basic example of what's called a syllogism. A syllogism is a really old concept from rhetoric that has to do with how an argument is constructed. Basically, in a syllogism, you start with what's called a major premise. Like these things over here are major premises. They are beliefs about how the world works and what's important. They're opinionated, and they might vary from person to person. And then you test that against what's called a minor premise, which is like a specific fact about this particular situation that we're involved in right now. And the way you interpret the minor premise, which leads you to your conclusion, is going to depend on the major premise that you believe. A really famous example of a syllogism comes from ancient Greece, where we start with the major premise, all men are mortal, and test it with a minor premise, Socrates is a man, which leads to the conclusion Socrates must be mortal. Let's take a look at how this kind of reasoning shapes debate. Oh, and that's clearly the car that you should buy right there. Okay, so we're going to talk about how syllogisms shape debate, why syllogisms kind of matter. Let me point out a situation that was in the news and is still in the news quite a bit recently. Here's a minor premise, a fact that we can go discover. A very large portion of Americans do not have health insurance. Obviously, that's changing a bit as I'm recording this video, but up until recently, at least, that was a clear fact. Now, how you interpreted that fact depended on your belief about the world. There were a lot of people who looked at that fact with the major premise that said all members of a society have a responsibility to promote the well-being of other members of the society. But there was an equally large group of people that looked at that fact with the major premise, people's position in life is a direct result of their decisions. We need to place consequences on poor decisions to motivate people to make good decisions. So this is a debate that we were having in the nation quite recently, trying to answer the question whether or not the government should or should not provide health insurance to all Americans. No one was really debating the number of uninsured people. The facts were pretty constant. The source of the debate is your belief about how the world works, your sort of test for what facts are valid and important and what those facts add up to mean. This is why we had such a long national conversation, or continuing to have such a long national conversation about an issue like this. A debate about facts could be resolved very quickly. A debate that has to do with people's premises about the way that they view the world is much more difficult to resolve. So we need another tool to look at these kind of arguments that allows us to create something a little more nuanced. So we're going to talk about the Toulmin model for argument. And the Toulmin model is going to be one of the most important concepts we'll use in class over the next few weeks. The Toulmin model is an improvement on the syllogism by adding some more information and some more flexibility to it that makes it more possible to deal with those differences in major premises, those differences in the way that people look at the world. There are 6 core elements to the Toulmin model. Let's start with what's called the claim. In the Toulmin model, the claim is the thing that you want your audience to believe or to do. It's an opinionated statement about something about them that you want to change. So an example of a claim is something like, we should give all the money that we have to charity, or something like that. All right? The next thing we need is evidence. Evidence is what's going to lead to the claim, but it only gets there because of what's called a warrant. In the Toulmin model, the warrant takes the place of that major premise. It's the since statement in your argument. The because of this thing, we should do that, or you should think this. So when you're presented with evidence, you test that evidence against a warrant to lead to a claim. Your warrant then needs what's called backing, which is the evidence that supports your warrant. Why should I believe your warrant? Why should I believe your view about how this type of situation should be dealt with? Then we have to deal with what's called the rebuttal, the however statement. So if you have a claim that's supported by evidence that makes sense given a warrant, you still need to acknowledge an alternate perspective in the rebuttal, that some people might view this differently. So the final element is what's called the qualifier, which is where you modify the claim to account for the rebuttal. So if you want me to believe your claim, you have to present some evidence that somehow adds up based on a warrant that is supported with backing. You need to be prepared for my potential rebuttal and qualify your response and modify it slightly. Let's look at a few examples of arguments built around the Toulmin model. Let's say I have a claim that all teachers deserve a raise. This is my totally unbiased opinion that I have come to. I want to convince you that all teachers deserve a raise. Well, clearly I need to present some form of evidence to support my claim. So I supply the evidence that teachers have worked very hard. Let's say I have all sorts of facts and statistics about the number of hours that teachers work every week. Well, the only reason that this fact leads to this conclusion is because of a particular warrant. In this case, the warrant is something like hard work should be rewarded. Let's say that you didn't believe that, right? Let's say you had a warrant that was more like, of course, everyone should work hard all the time. That's how life works. Just because you're working hard doesn't mean you need to be particularly rewarded, in which case we would have to have a debate here. So I need some kind of backing for my warrant. Let's say I have some psychology research that shows how people work much harder after they get positive reinforcement. Here's all my evidence that illustrates that after people are rewarded, they do better work. So because of that backing, my warrant that hard work should be rewarded makes sense. So we can use it to make my evidence that teachers have worked very hard prove that all teachers deserve a raise. But notice that my claim is phrased as an absolute. So you say, au contraire, some teachers are in fact quite lazy. So I need to qualify my statement and say, all right, fine. Clearly, at least Mr. Kennedy deserves a raise. So this is where we see the Toulmin model at work. That's an example of a Toulmin argument. So let's take a look at a Toulmin argument that's missing some of these elements, and we'll see how they work together. Let's say that I present you with some evidence that most students enjoy chocolate ice cream. And let's say I provide a warrant that the school cafeteria needs to make decisions that benefit the most students. What claim could we use that to support? Well, my claim is going to become the school cafeteria needs to provide chocolate ice cream to every student every day. Because students like chocolate ice cream and the school cafeteria needs to make decisions that benefit the students, well, you might question my warrant, so I need to be able to back it up. And I'm going to say, look, the cafeteria is funded by taxpayer money. That's effectively the students' money, or at least their parents' money, that's going into the cafeteria. So clearly, we should use those resources to give the students what they want, which in this case is chocolate ice cream, in which case you make a rebuttal. Hang on now, Mr. Kennedy. Even students who like chocolate ice cream will eventually get sick of it. So we're going to take my claim that the cafeteria should serve chocolate ice cream every day and say, okay, the cafeteria will serve ice cream 4 days a week, but on Wednesdays it will be vanilla. And that's what the ice cream would look like. Here's a different example of a Toulmin argument that's missing some pieces. Let's say we have some evidence. Let's say that Mr. Kennedy deposited exactly $10,000 the day after the school's fund for donation to homeless orphans with puppies was robbed of exactly $10,000. You could use that to make the claim that Mr. Kennedy clearly stole the money, in which case your warrant is probably something like the only way that Mr. Kennedy could have $10,000 is if he stole it from the Homeless Orphans with Puppies Fund. And you back that up by pointing out that Mr. Kennedy's bank balance was only $6.42 for the 3 years leading up to that deposit. So you have a warrant that supports your interpretation of the evidence to lead to your claim, and that warrant is supported by evidence of its own. But let's say someone makes the rebuttal, well, hang on, Mr. Kennedy does invest almost all of his earnings into lottery tickets and games of three-card Monte organized by unscrupulous men standing on street corners. Perhaps he won the $10,000. So we need to qualify our claim and say, assuming that he didn't win $10,000 in a game of three-card Monte, Mr. Kennedy must have robbed the fund for homeless orphans with puppies. There's the guy that Mr. Kennedy plays three-card Monte with. One day he'll win. Here's one more example. Let's say that we want to claim that Joe the student is sure to do well in college. And the way you intend to support that claim is with the warrant that AP Composition, AP Language and Comp, is the most accurate predictor of future success in college. Well, clearly we'd need some evidence that Joe student here does well in APLAC. And that warrant needs backing of some kind. We need some statistics and things that actually show that AP Comp is a good predictor of future success in college. But we see that you're going to end up modifying this to say that, well, as long as he goes to a school that doesn't require math classes, Joe is sure to do well in college. That would indicate that the missing piece of this argument is your rebuttal that, hang on, Joe's failed every math class he ever took. Here's an example of one of Joe's papers. So you use the Toulmin model to develop an argument that makes sense, that we can debate, where you can take those warrants, those supporting ideas, and bring them out into the open for discussion and evaluation.